And now I would like to introduce to you Professor Renos Papadopoulos, who has joined us from the UK. Good morning, Professor Papadopoulos. It's very good to see you. And we are indeed very honoured that you are able to give us the time in your very, very busy schedule to join us and present to us this morning. We really greatly appreciate it and are pleased that you are part of this symposium this morning. And so Professor Papadopoulos is Professor of Analytical Psychology and Director of the Centre for Trauma, Asylum and Refugees at the University of Essex. And he's a member of the Human Rights Centre, Transitional Justice Networks, and he has been working tirelessly with refugees, tortured people, trafficked people, and other survivors of political violence and disasters in many countries. So he comes to us with a wealth of experience. We look forward to what you have to say to us, Renos.
Thank you, Patricia. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to have been invited to this very important event. The time is very limited, so I will try to jump into what I want to share with you, and I will do my very best to create some time for us within the half an hour that is allocated to me to even have some exchanges with you. I really hope that some people will respond to what I'm trying to say. So without any further ado, let me share my screen and start my own presentation, which is about, of course, what the theme of the day, which is the range of consequences from being exposed to what I call severe forms of collective adversity, which is, of course, war is a severe form of collective adversity. It's adversity that affects wider groups of people. And I'm starting with Heraclitus. As you may all know, that there is this famous dictum from him that war is the father of all and king of all, who manifested some as gods and some as men, who made some slaves and some free men. Now, this apophthegm from Heraclitus has been discussed by philosophers, by philologists, by psychologists endlessly. I'm not going to subject it to deep scrutiny here. All I want to do is just pick up the key things, and that is, here is war, which is an event, and is so important, but it creates it has consequences completely opposite. You know, some people become gods as a result of that, and some ordinary men, and some slaves, and some free men. So immediately, what we need to remember from this is war creates paradoxes and questions our causality. In other words, shows us these polarized consequences and contradictory outcomes. And for example, positive gods and free men, negative men, insignificant mortals and slaves. So on the one hand, it tells us that the nature of event, of course, clearly is very absolutely negative. And of course, we're not going to talk about war according to Heraclitus is not necessarily the physical war, but also any kind of conflict. But in this occasion, I'm taking it to refer to specifically physical war, which he is not excluding, of course, Heraclitus. So he's making basically a big distinction between the nature of the event and the impact of the event. And this is one of the key messages that I want to convey today. That's why I'm starting with Heraclitus. The event itself is clearly absolutely negative. There is no question about that, destructive and all of that. Whereas the impact of the event depends on individuals, group circumstances, context, etc., etc. And I think this is really the important thing. The impact of the event is definitely overwhelming. It's powerful. It shakes us. It's to the core of our beings. It makes, according to the expressions, it makes you or breaks you. In these sort of situations, people find God or lose God. They go through hell, etc., etc. All of these expressions are expressions of fundamentally changing situations, of events that have a powerful and overwhelming impact on us. This is a segment from the First World War. In that hellish situation of the First World War, where, as you know, millions of people were slaughtered in the trenches, a group of English soldiers started developing a newspaper, and here you can see the paradoxes and contradictions of that absolute despair, and with the humor, which is of course inevitable in these sort of situations. And I have no doubt that books will start emerging in Ukraine now about the humorous ways of dealing with these situations. Perhaps now it's a little bit sort of sacrilegious to talk about it in that way, but believe me, not long, the first books will begin to appear. But here it is. I mean, he's saying, are you a victim? And immediately we think, of the war, of optimism, the paradoxes. And then here they have a kind of an inventory. You don't even know perhaps that you suffer from optimism. Then ask yourself the following questions: do you suffer from cheerfulness, etc., etc.? I'm not going to, and then we can cure you. Come to us, to the crumble stones, and then, for 2 weeks, and then we will cure you. You will stop being, So here you see the human spirit trying to deal with this impossibly overwhelming and bleak situation with the paradoxes and with the opposites. Of course, as therapists, we can say this is a defense and all of that. But my point is basically that in these sort of situations, there are some clear causality, but also paradoxical causality. The predominant discourses that we usually have in our societies today, unfortunately, are to pathologize people. In other words, in order to help people, we need to sort of say, oh, please pity them, they're traumatized, we need to help them. In other words, we're not helping people who are healthy or who are finding meaning in this sort of situation. So this is a very peculiar paradox here. And we can actually refer to a vulnerabilization of our discourses and policies of care. In order to care for people, we need to identify them as vulnerable first. And of course, that makes sense at some stage, from some perspective, but also it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because, as we know, in social sciences, there are many eminent people who have been warning us about these peculiar situations, calling them politics of pity, spectacle of suffering, etc. In other words, parading people's suffering in order to solicit support and help. No, people deserve assistance, and we need to help them with their dignity, not to parade their suffering, and indulge in politics of pity. Pity them. help them. No, help them because for their human dignity, their human rights, they are entitled to help. The other predominant discourse in this sort of situation is that unfortunately it privileges the psychological and psychiatric dimensions. On the one hand, we would be very pleased about because we're in this business ourselves. But actually, we need to be very careful because there is a tendency to ignore or minimize other human dimensions, for example, the political, financial, educational, spiritual, moral, etc. But from the presentation already we had this morning, we can see that actually the wealth and astuteness of therapists involved in this event do not overlook these other dimensions. Another point that I want to make is that an overlooked casualty, in other words, what we suffer from being exposed to severe forms of collective adversity for all implicated parties, not only for those that we want to help, but for us, is the lack of complexity. We lose complexity. In these sort of situations, because the impact is so overwhelming, we tend to lose complexity. Again, due to the nature of the severe forms of collective adversities and because of the enormity and concreteness of the destructiveness at all levels in these sort of forms of adversity, the impact is overwhelming. Overwhelming means we are overflooded. We are we're overflooded by emotionally charged experiences plus pressing needs. And this is what I call it a very lethal cocktail. It's a lethal cocktail. Emotionally charged experiences with pressing needs. We need to do something now, urgently. That cocktail is very, very lethal. It creates more overwhelming impact. And therefore, what is the outcome? Our capacity to process events and experiences becomes diminished. In psychotherapy, we say we have no space to think, to reflect, and we indulge in impulsive conceptualization or epistemological acting out, as I call it, which means that we oversimplify and polarize our understandings of everything. And if we oversimplify and polarize, let's not forget, the war is a polarizing situation. Either you're on my side or you're on their side, and it's life and death. There can be no more polarization there. And that permeates the way that we think about everything in relation to this situation. And that destroys complexity, and that destroys the human capacity to reflect and to process. So this is something that we really need to be very careful of, because by oversimplifying and polarizing, in effect, we distort reality. And if we distort reality, we cannot be effective in planning and acting. The usual way of understanding things is in terms of cause and effect. And cause and effect, of course, it does exist in nature and with natural events and physical events. But when it comes to the human relationships and human situation in social sciences, the cause and effect is much more complicated, because it's not just simply the war creates the trauma. Yes, I mean, there is some sense there, but there is more complexity, because here the way that we experience the adversity matters. It's not just the adversity comes to us, and of course the whole psychology is based on that. The context, the motives, the perspectives, the meaning attribution processes, what I call. And what are these meaning attribution processes? All of these things. We don't have time to go through all of them, but the whole psychology is about that. There are personal factors involved. In other words, people's individual history, coping mechanisms, strengths, weaknesses, relational factors, what kind of support systems we have. We have so many studies about gender, age, race, disability, how they affect the way we experience adversity. then motives that they lead to adversity, set meaning systems that we use to account for events. People use religious systems, people use political systems, etc. These are an integral part of the way we perceive events and our own experiences. And of course, it's not only the previous past experiences, but also the present situation matters and the future. So all of these factors constitute these green box here, what I call meaning attribution processes. So the world does not impact on us just directly. Different people impact differently because of all of these factors. And of course, what you should not forget is the factor of time. And we have heard very eloquently Professor Larissa telling us about how it used to be at the beginning, how it is now, and etc. So we need to factor time. It's not just simply cause and effect in an abstract way. In order to reintroduce complexity, I have developed over the years what I refer to as the adversity grid that is used very widely by UN agencies and in many other situations now, which helps us understand that yes, when we're exposed to adversity, of course there are negative effects, but a lot of things about individuals, families, workplace, communities remain unchanged. And we need to be able to identify those as well. Not only the negative things, and we focus there to fix them and repair them, but also what strengths have they been able to retain. So in the unchanged, we have both the negative and the positive unchanged. And the positive unchanged is what I call resilience. I know everybody's using the word resilience, and I don't know what it means. I have a very clear and operational definition of resilience, which is the retained strengths from our previous situations before the adversity was encountered. So what strengths I had before and what strengths I still have, although I have been exposed to adversity. These are my resilient functions. And we have heard, and we will hear again in the presentation again. Sorry, these things are jumping. That also there are positive effects from being exposed to adversity. The war is bad, but yes, some positive things people can gain as well. And this appears logically contradictory, and we find it even morally difficult to say. We're not justifying war. No, of course not. But we cannot also ignore that the war can create situations where people can grow. And that requires what I call epistemological agility. So even further, in order not to oversimplify and polarize things are not just simply in terms of black and white. We need to realize that even within the negative effects, not all effects are the same negative. Some are least severe, some most severe, and some moderately severe. For example, not everything is a psychiatric disorder. So there is some suffering, there is some distress, and there is disorder. There are different degrees of negative. And we need to make a distinction. Otherwise, we pathologize those people who want to help. Please, let's be very clear about this. PTSD is, when we're talking about individuals, PTSD is a disorder, it's a psychiatric disorder. It's not just simply a response to adversity. So we need to be very careful about that. And this is what the humanitarian organizations remind us, that actually both the international organizations, we don't have time to waste on that, remind us basically that the majority of people, this is the percentage of people in situations of severe forms of adversity, the majority of people do not need specialist mental health care. They are not crazy, to put it crudely. They are not psychologically disturbed. Yes, they experience distress and discomfort, but is that a psychological, a psychiatric disorder? Of course not. The majority of people require basic psychosocial support about community, about basic promotion of positive mental health and psychosocial well-being, etc. And as it goes up, this pyramid, less and less people require specialist mental health support. So as psychotherapists, we need to know our place. And we should not impose ourselves in sort of healthy people and trying to sort of use our theories that we're using for psychologically disturbed people. We need to have some respect there, and need to adjust and adapt our services. And you know, these are two. This is from the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, and this is from the standing interagency standing committee that coordinates humanitarian support. Both of them have this very clear pyramid that reminds us that the overwhelming majority of people experience some human suffering and distress, and very few experience psychiatric disorders. And the majority of them that experience psychiatric disorders, research shows us, are people who are experiencing before psychiatric disorders. So the war itself, the difficulties, the severe forms of collective adversity have not caused that. So this is what I'm saying, and I'm really trying to sort of rushing through. We should not forget that when we're talking about well-being, I started with Heraclitus, I'm finishing with Aristotle. Aristotle made a distinction between two types of well-being. One is the hedonic, and the other is the eudaimonic. The hedonic is the avoidance of suffering. And this is what, unfortunately, the majority of societal efforts to help people in distress is aimed to stop them feeling bad, stop your trauma, stop your suffering. It's not possible to stop all suffering. It's not possible to stop suffering. And it's human to have some suffering. It would be worrying if they didn't experience some suffering, But so I'm not saying that we should be promoting suffering, but our aim should not be just to stop the trauma and nothing else. The eudaimonic well-being, according to Aristotle, is to actualize one's potential, to living according to one's unique nature, to acquire a sense of fulfillment. And therefore, that leads me to complete my presentation about the new challenges for psychotherapists in these sort of situations. First, to become aware of our limitations and our appropriateness. Where do we help and when do we not help? And in what way do we help? So in what context can we be relevant, and how to use our knowledge and experiences? If you use the knowledge and experience from your training institute, that is for people who are psychologically disturbed, is this respectful to use it for ordinary population who are struggling with appropriate distress? We need to make a distinction between distress and disorder. Distress is appropriate. What are the predominant? We need to be aware of the predominant overlapping discourses at any given moment. When we heard in our previous speaker, survival, then that's the priority. Then are the political issues. Political issues matter, but are therapeutic issues. We need to be able to distinguish and navigate through these complexities of these situations. and in terms of people developing meaning of life. And that's why I'm talking about epistemological astuteness and agility. That whilst attending to the pain and suffering, not to ignore the transformational potentialities of severe forms of collective adversity, what I call adversity activated development. That because of our exposure to adversity, people now can develop new ways of understanding themselves, new ways of coping with life, etc. These are gains, these are transformations. And when we're talking about working holistically, this is the way that I understand holistically. Looking, yes, at the pain and trauma and try to minimize that as much as we can. Understand and value the existing strengths that people have, as well as identify and value and use what they have gained from that, the growth, what I call adversity activated development, the development that is activated because people have been exposed to these unnatural and horrific circumstances. And that is where we need all of this complexity of thinking and agility, not to say, yes, war is bad, but some people can develop unique opportunities for growth in these situations. This is what I want to tell you. I hope that there is an opportunity for at least a couple of questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, Renos. That was brilliant. It was a brilliant follow on from the first presentation, and you linked beautifully to Larissa's words. It was brilliant for our symposium today because you ended with those new challenges, and you also reminded us about the important thing about resilience. People might flourish in times of peace, but people are defined in times of war and challenge. And that's also true of cultures, and it's also true of countries, that they are defined in times of war. And you've highlighted for us how central that is. And I love that bit from Aristotle, the avoidance, it's not the avoidance of suffering, it's actualizing our potential. And the importance of that, and then the new challenges for psychotherapists that you listed for us. I think we'll gather those together and perhaps offer those to the groups this afternoon would be a good thing to do. If you'll forgive me, I'm not going to take a question now, but Professor Papadopoulos is going to be with us in the round table for speakers this afternoon, and the round table for speakers is all about questions to the speakers. So please, will you save your question for Renos, and he will be joining us again this afternoon, and then you'll have a chance to ask your question. I hope that that's okay with you, Renos. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. We look forward to you being with us later on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye for now.